The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Sterling Industries headquarters as employees gathered for the annual charity gala. At 28, Victoria Sterling commanded the room with the kind of presence that made grown men stumble over their words and competitors question their life choices. Her emerald dress hugged her frame perfectly. Her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was untouchable, unreachably a queen surveying her empire from behind walls built of privilege and power. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, the weight of her father's legacy pressed heavier on her shoulders than usual. "Miss Sterling, the mayor would like a word," her assistant whispered, appearing at her elbow like a shadow. Victoria nodded absently, her gaze drifting across the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. Board members mingled with city officials, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling like the sound of money being counted. This was her world, cold, calculated, and profitable. Yet as she watched a group of executives dismiss a server with barely concealed disdain, something twisted uncomfortably in her chest. The waltz began then, its haunting melody filling the ballroom. Couples moved onto the dance floor with practiced ease, their movements as predictable as quarterly reports. Victoria's fingers tightened around her champagne flute as memories of her grandmother surfaced unbidden, the old woman's weathered hands teaching her the steps, her gentle voice explaining that the waltz wasn't just about dancing, but about connection, about seeing the soul of another person. "Grandmother's silly romantic notions," Victoria murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. "What a beautiful piece," someone said beside her. Victoria turned, expecting another fawning board member, and found herself looking at the building's night janitor. She recognized him vaguely, a tall, lean man in his early 30s with kind eyes and calloused hands. He'd removed his work uniform for the evening, dressed instead in a simple but clean black suit that had clearly seen better days. His presence at the gala was jarring, completely out of place among the designer everything that surrounded them. "Excuse me?" Victoria's voice carried that particular chill she'd perfected over years of boardroom battles. "The waltz," he said, seemingly unaffected by her tone. "Chopin's Waltz in A-flat major. My grandmother used to play it on an old piano that was missing 3 keys." He smiled, and something in Victoria's chest fluttered unexpectedly. "I'm Marcus, by the way." "Marcus Rivera." Victoria stared at him, her mind struggling to process this breach of social protocol. Janitors didn't approach CEOs at charity galas. They didn't discuss classical music or share personal anecdotes. They certainly didn't smile at her like she was just another person instead of Victoria Sterling, heir to a billion-dollar empire. "I know who you are," she said finally, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What I don't understand is why you think we have anything to discuss." The cruel words hung in the air between them, and Victoria immediately regretted them. But this was her armor, her protection against a world that would devour any sign of weakness. She waited for him to retreat, to apologize and shuffle away like everyone else did when she showed her teeth. Instead, Marcus's smile widened. "You're right," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just the guy who empties your trash cans. What could I possibly know about music, or art, or the fact that you've been staring at that dance floor for the past 10 minutes like you're watching your own funeral?" Victoria's champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. "How dare you dance with me?" Marcus interrupted, extending his hand. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Conversations faltered as nearby guests turned to stare at the spectacle unfolding before them. Victoria felt the weight of 100 eyes, the whispered gasps, the barely contained shock rippling through her carefully orchestrated world. "Are you insane?" she hissed, stepping back. "Do you have any idea who I am, what I could do to you?" "Fire me," Marcus shrugged. his hand still outstretched. I've been fired before, but I've never danced with someone who looks like she's forgotten how to breathe. The observation hit too close to home, and Victoria's carefully constructed mask slipped for just a moment. Because he was right, she had forgotten how to breathe, how to live, how to be anything other than the Sterling Industries logo in human form. She glanced around the ballroom, noting the amused smirks of her competitors, the disapproving frowns of the board members, the phones already being raised to capture what would surely become corporate gossip by morning. Dancing with the janitor would be social suicide, professional catastrophe wrapped in 3/4 time. If you can dance this waltz, Victoria heard herself say, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom, I'll marry you. The words escaped before she could stop them, born from years of frustration and a desperate need to shock, to wound, to put this presumptuous man in his place. She expected him to laugh, to back down, to finally understand the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Instead, Marcus stepped forward and took her hand. His touch was warm, calloused from years of honest work, and so gentle that Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. When had anyone last touched her with such simple kindness? When had anyone looked at her like she mattered beyond her bank account and board position? Then I guess I better not mess this up, Marcus said softly, and led her onto the dance floor. The music swelled around them as Marcus placed his other hand on her waist, pulling her into the proper waltz position. Victoria's body moved on instinct, muscle memory from childhood lessons taking over even as her mind reeled. But something was wrong, or rather, something was incredibly right. Marcus didn't dance like a janitor. He moved with fluid grace, his steps confident and sure, leading her through the complex patterns of the waltz as if he'd been born to it. Where did you learn to dance like this? Victoria whispered, her early anger evaporating into confusion. My grandmother, Marcus replied, spinning her effortlessly. She was a dance instructor before the war. Taught me that dancing was about more than steps, it was about trust, about letting someone else carry you when you couldn't carry yourself. As they moved across the floor, Victoria became aware of the absolute silence surrounding them. The other dancers had stopped, forming a circle around them like witnesses to something sacred. The board members stood frozen, their expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties to watch the impossible tableau unfolding before them. But Victoria saw none of it. Her world had narrowed to the man holding her, to the way he moved like water around stone, accommodating her stumbles and transforming them into something beautiful. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, and not as a sterling, not as a CEO, not as a prize to be won or a target to be conquered, but simply as Victoria. Why? She found herself asking as he dipped her low, her heart racing. Why risk your job for a dance? Marcus pulled her back up, his eyes never leaving hers. Because 3 months ago, I found you crying in your office at 2 in the morning. You didn't know I was there, cleaning the conference room next door. You looked so lost, so tired of being strong for everyone else. I wanted to tell you then that it was okay to be human, but I knew you wouldn't hear it from someone like me. Victoria's breath caught. She remembered that night of the quarterly reports that wouldn't balance, the board meeting that had gone disastrously wrong, the crushing weight of expectations that had finally broken through her defenses. She'd thought she was alone in her vulnerability. You stayed, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. I stayed, Marcus confirmed, leading her through a series of turns that left her dizzy. And I watched you put yourself back together piece by piece. That's when I knew. Knew what? That the woman everyone fears is just someone who's forgotten she deserves to be loved. The waltz was ending, the final notes hanging in the air like a prayer. Marcus slowed their movements, drawing her closer until they were barely swaying, lost in a moment that felt stolen from time itself. Victoria could feel the heat of his body through the thin fabric of her dress, could smell the faint scent of soap and something indefinably masculine that made her want to lean into him and never let go. "The song's over," she said softly, though neither of them stopped moving. "Not yet," Marcus replied, and Victoria realized he was right. The orchestra had begun another waltz, this one slower, more intimate. One more dance. Victoria Sterling. Just one more. Her name on his lips sounded different, summer, and not like the title everyone else used, but like a secret shared between lovers. Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. Years of loneliness and isolation bleeding out like poison from a wound. Around them, the crowd had begun to murmur, but their voices sounded far away and unimportant. Victoria's board of directors looked like they'd swallowed their ties, and she could practically see the gossip columns writing themselves. But for once, she didn't care. For once, the opinion that mattered most was her own. As the second waltz drew to a close, Marcus brought her to a stop in the center of the dance floor. He raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity shooting up her arm. "Thank you," he said simply. Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. She thought of her empty penthouse apartment, of the board meetings that stretched into infinity, of the life she'd built that felt more like a beautiful prison with each passing day. She thought of her grandmother's words about the waltz being a window to the soul, and realized that for the first time in years, someone had looked through that window and chosen to stay. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Yes?" Victoria took a deep breath, aware that her next words would change everything. The ballroom held its collective breath, society's elite waiting to see how their ice queen would handle this unprecedented breach of protocol. She smiled then, really smiled, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "When should we start planning the wedding?" The ballroom erupted. Gasps turned to shocked laughter, whispers became excited chatter, and camera phones flashed like paparazzi lightning. But Victoria heard none of it, saw nothing but the joy spreading across Marcus's face like sunrise after the longest night. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as she laughed for the first time since her grandmother's funeral. When he set her down, his hands framed her face with reverence, as if she were made of spun glass and starlight. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Your world, your life here, it's not going to be easy explaining this." Victoria leaned into his touch, finally understanding what her grandmother had tried to teach her all those years ago. The waltz wasn't about the steps or the music or the elegant costumes. It was about finding someone who could dance with your soul, someone who saw your broken pieces and chose to help you put them back together into something even more beautiful than what came before.